Good evening, and welcome to Renton Civic Theater presents Scary Stories to be Told in the Dark. Tonight we feature two stories. First episode, The Truth, the Whole Truth, and Nothing But the Truth by Rhoda Broughton, is a chilling episode based on rumors circulating around London's firesides about a house in Mayfair. All looks well kept, but under the floorboards of even the most wholesome homes, corpses may lie rotting.
Mrs. De Wint to Mrs. Montreser, 18 Eccleston Square, May 5th. My dearest Cecilia, talk of the friendships of Orestes and Pylades, of Julie and Claire, what are they to ours? Did Pylades ever go ventre-terre, half over London on a day more broiling than any but an âne damnée could imagine, in order that Orestes might be comfortably housed for the season? Did Claire ever hold sweet converse with from 50 to 100 house agents, in order that Julie might have 3 windows to her drawing-room and a pretty portière? You see, I am determined not to be done out of my full meed of gratitude. Well, my friend, I had no idea till yesterday how closely we were packed in this great smoky beehive, as tightly as herrings in a barrel. Don't be frightened, however. By dint of squeezing and crowding, we have managed to make room for 2 more herrings in our barrel, and those 2 are yourself and your other self, i.e. your husband. Let me begin at the beginning. After having looked over, I verily believe, every undesirable residence in West London, after having seen nothing intermediate between what was suited to the means of a duke and what was suited to the needs of a chimney-sweep, after having felt bed ticking and explored kitchen ranges till my brain reeled under my accumulated experience, I arrived at about 5:30 yesterday afternoon at 32 Charles Street, Mayfair. Failure number 253, I don't doubt, I said to myself as I toiled up the steps with my soul athirst for afternoon tea and feeling as ill-tempered as you please. So much for my spirit of prophecy. Fate, I have noticed, is often fond of contradicting us flat and giving the lie to our little predictions. Once inside, I thought I had got into a small compartment of heaven by mistake. Fresh as a daisy, clean as a cherry, bright as a seraph's face, it is all these and 100 more, only that my limited stock of similes is exhausted. 2 drawing rooms, as pretty as ever woman crammed with people she did not care 2 straws about. White curtains with rose-colored ones underneath, festooned in the sweetest way, marvelously, immorally becoming, my dear, as I ascertained entirely for your benefit, in the mirrors, of which there are about 12.5. Persian mats, easy chairs, and lounges suited to every possible physical conformation, from the Apollo Belvedere to Miss Biffin, and 1,000 of the important little trivialities that make up the sum of a woman's life. Peacock fans, Japanese screens, naked boys in décolleté shepherdesses, not to speak of a family of china pugs, with blue ribbons round their necks, which ought themselves to have added £50 a year to the rent. Apropos, I asked, in fear and trembling, what the rent might be. £300 a year? A feather would have knocked me down. I could hardly believe my ears, and made the woman repeat it several times, that there might be no mistake. To this hour it is a mystery to me. With that suspiciousness which is so characteristic of you, you will immediately begin to hint that there must be some terrible, unaccountable smell, or some odious, inexplicable noise haunting the reception rooms. None of the kind, the woman assured me, and she did not look as if she were telling stories. You will next suggest, remembering the rose-colored curtains, that its last occupant was a member of the demi-monde. Wrong again. Its last occupant was an elderly and unexceptionable Indian officer, without a liver and with a most lawful wife. They did not stay long, it is true, but then, as the housekeeper told me, he was a deplorable old hypochondriac, who never could bear to stay a fortnight in any one place. So lay aside that skepticism, which is your besetting sin, and give unfeigned thanks to St. Brigitta, or St. Gungolpha, or St. Catherine of Siena, or whoever is your tutelar saint, for having provided you with a palace at the cost of a hovel, and for having sent you such an invaluable friend as your attached Elizabeth De Wint. P.S. I am so sorry I shall not be in town to witness your first raptures, but dear Artie looks so pale and thin and tall after the whooping cough that I am sending him off at once to the sea, and as I cannot bear the child out of my sight, I am going into banishment likewise.
Mrs. Montresor to Mrs. De Wint, 32 Charles Street, Mayfair, May 14th. Dearest Bessie, why did not dear little Artie defer his whooping cough convalescence till August? It is very odd to me, the perverse way in which children always fix upon the most inconvenient times and seasons for their diseases. Here we are, installed in our paradise, and have searched high and low in every hole and corner for the serpent, without succeeding in catching a glimpse of his spotted tail. Most things in the world are disappointing, but 32 Charles Street, Mayfair, is not. The mystery of the rent is still a mystery. I have been for my first ride in the Row this morning. My horse was a little fidgety. I am half afraid that my nerve is not what it was. I saw heaps of people I knew. Do you recollect Florence Watson? What a wealth of red hair she had last year. Well, that same wealth is black as the raven's wing this year. I wonder how people can make such walking impositions of themselves, don't you? Adela comes to us next week. I am so glad. It is dull driving by oneself of an afternoon, and I always think that one young woman alone in a brougham, or with only a dog beside her, does not look good. We sent round our cards a fortnight before we came up, and have been already deluged with callers. Considering that we have been 2 years exiled from the civilized life, and that London memories are not generally of the longest, we shall do pretty well, I think. Rolf Gordon came to see me on Sunday. He is in the Hussars now. He has grown up such a dear fellow, and so good-looking. Just my style, large and fair and whiskerless. Most men nowadays make themselves as like monkeys or Scotch terriers as they possibly can. I intend to be quite a mother to him. Dresses are gawd to as indecent an extent as ever. Short skirts are rampant. I am sorry. I hate them. They make tall women look lank and short ones insignificant. A knock? Peace is a word that might as well be expunged from one's London dictionary. Yours affectionately, Cecilia Montresor.
Mrs. De Wint to Mrs. Montresor, the Lord Warden, Dover, May 18th. Dearest Cecilia, you will perceive that I am about to devote only one small sheet of notepaper to you. This is from no dearth of time, heaven knows. Time is a drug in the market here, but from a total dearth of ideas. Any ideas that I ever have come to me from without, from external objects. I am not clever enough to generate any within myself. My life here is not an eminently suggestive one. It is spent digging with a wooden spade and eating prawns. Those are my employments, at least. My relaxation is going down to the pier to see the Calais boat come in. When one is miserable oneself, it is decidedly consolatory to see someone more miserable still, and wretched and bored and reluctant vegetable as I am not seasick. I always feel my spirits rise after having seen that peevish, draggled procession of blue, green, and yellow fellow Christians file past me. There is a wind here always, in comparison of which the wind that behaved so violently to the corner of Job's house was a mere zephyr. There are heights to climb which require more daring perseverance than ever Wolfe displayed with his paltry heights of Abraham. There are glaring white houses, glaring white roads, glaring white cliffs. If anyone knew how unpatriotically I detest the chalk cliffs of Albion. Having grumbled through my 2 little pages, I actually have been reduced to writing very large in order to fill even them, I will send off my dreary little billet. How I wish I could get into the envelope myself too, and whirl up with it to dear, beautiful, filthy London. Not more heavily could Madame de Stael have sighed for Paris from among the shades of Coppet. Your disconsolate, Bessie.
Oh, my dearest Bessie, how I wish we were out of this dreadful, dreadful house. Please don't think me very ungrateful for saying this, after your taking such pains to provide us with a heaven upon earth as you thought. What has happened could, of course, have been neither foretold nor guarded against by any human being. About 10 days ago, Benson, my maid, came to me with a very long face and said, "If you please, did you know that this house was haunted?" I was so startled, you know what a coward I am. I said, "Good heavens, no, it is?" "Well, I'm pretty nice sure it is," she said, and the expression of her countenance was about as lively as an undertaker's. And then she told me that cook had been that morning to order groceries from a shop in the neighborhood, and on her giving the man the direction where to send the things to, he had said, with a very peculiar smile, 32 Charles Street, eh? I wonder how long you'll stand it. Last lot held out just a fortnight." He looked so odd that she asked him what he meant, but he only said, "Oh, nothing, only that parties never do stay long at 32. He had known parties go in one day and out the next, and during the last 4 years he had never known any remain over the month. Feeling a good deal alarmed by this information, she naturally inquired the reason, but he declined to give it, saying that if she had not found it out for herself, she had much better leave it alone, as it would only frighten her out of her wits, and on her insisting and urging him, she could only extract from him that the house had such a villainously bad name that the owners were glad to let it for a mere song. You know how firmly I believe in apparitions, and what an unutterable fear I have of them. Anything material, tangible, that I can lay hold of, anything of the same fibre, blood and bone as myself, I could, I think, confront bravely enough, but the mere thought of being brought face to face with the bodiless dead makes my brain unsteady. The moment Harry came in, I ran to him and told him, but he pooh-poohed the whole story, laughed at me, and asked whether we should turn out of the prettiest house in London at the very height of the season, because a grocer said it had a bad name. Most good things that had ever been in the world had had a bad name in their day, and moreover the man had probably a motive for taking away the house's character, some friend for whom he coveted the charm, situation, and low rent. He derided my babyish fears, as he called them, to such an extent that I felt half ashamed, and yet not quite comfortable either. And then came the usual rush of London engagements, during which one has no time to think of anything but how to speak and act and look for the moment then present. Adela was to arrive yesterday, and in the morning our weekly hamper of flowers, fruit, and vegetables arrived from home. I always dress the flower vases myself. Servants are so tasteless. And as I was arranging them, it occurred to me, you know Adela's passion for flowers, to carry up one particular cornucopia of roses and mignonettes and set it on her toilet table as a pleasant surprise for her. As I came downstairs, I had seen the housemaid, a fresh, round-faced country girl, go into the room which was being prepared for Adela, with a pair of sheets that had been airing over the arm. I went upstairs very slowly, as my cornucopia was full of water, and I was afraid of spilling some. I turned the handle of the bedroom door and entered, keeping my eyes fixated on my flowers, to see how they bore the transit, and whether any of them had fallen out. Suddenly a sort of shiver passed over me, and feeling frightened, I didn't know why, I looked up quickly. The girl was standing by the bed, leaning forward a little, with her hands clenched in each other, rigid, every nerve tense, her eyes wide open, starting out of her head, and a look of unutterable stony horror in them. Her cheeks and mouth not pale, but livid as those of one that had died a while ago in mortal pain. As I looked at her, her lips moved a little, and an awful, hoarse voice, not like hers in the least, said, "Oh, my God, I have seen it!" And then she fell down suddenly, like a log with a heavy noise. Hearing the noise loudly audible all through the thin walls of the floors of the London house, Benson came running in, and between us we managed to lift her onto the bed and tried to bring her to herself by rubbing her feet and hands and holding strong salts to her nostrils. And all the while we kept glancing over our shoulders in a vague, cold terror of seeing some awful shapeless apparition. 2 long hours she lay in a state of utter unconsciousness. Meanwhile, Harry, who had been down to his club, returned. At the end of 2 hours we succeeded in bringing her back to sensation and life, but only to make the awful discovery that she was raving mad. She became so violent that it required all the combined strength of Harry and Phillips, our butler, to hold her down on the bed. Of course, we sent off instantly for a doctor who, on her growing a little calmer towards evening, removed her in a cab to his own house. He had just been here to tell me that she is now pretty quiet, not from any return to sanity, but from sheer exhaustion. We are, of course, utterly in the dark as to what she saw, and her ravings are far too disconnected and unintelligible to afford us the slightest clue. I feel so completely shattered and upset by this awful occurrence that you will excuse me, dear, I'm sure, if I write incoherently. One thing I need hardly tell you, and that is that no earthly consideration would induce me to allow Adela to occupy that terrible room. I shudder and run by quickly as I pass the door. Yours, in great agitation, Cecilia.
Mrs. De Wint to Mrs. Montresor, the Lord Warden, Dover, May 28th. Dearest Cecilia, yours just come, how very dreadful! But I am still unconvinced as to house being in fault. You know I feel a sort of godmother to it, and responsible for its good behaviour. Don't you think that what the girl had might have been a fit? Why not? I myself have a cousin who is subject to seizures of the kind, and immediately on being attacked his whole body becomes rigid, his eyes glassy and staring, his complexion livid, exactly as in the case you describe. Or, if not a fit, are you sure that she has not been subject to fits of madness? Please be sure and ascertain whether or not there is insanity in her family. It is so common nowadays, and so much on the increase, that nothing is more likely. You know my utter disbelief in ghosts. I am convinced that most of them, if run to earth, would turn out about as genuine as the famed Cock Lane one. But even allowing the possibility, nay, the actual unquestioned existence of ghosts in the abstract, is it likely that there should be anything to be seen so horribly fear-inspiring as to send a perfectly sane person in one instant raving mad, which you, after 3 weeks' residence in the house, have never caught a glimpse of? According to your hypothesis, your whole household ought, by this time, to be stark staring mad. Let me implore you not to give way to a panic which may, possibly, probably prove utterly groundless. Oh, how I wish I were with you to make you listen to reason. Artie ought to be the best prop ever woman's old age was furnished with, to indemnify me for all he and his whooping cough have made me suffer. Write immediately, please, and tell me how the poor patient progresses. Oh, had I the wings of a dove, I shall be on wires till I hear again. Yours, Bessie.
Mrs. Montresor to Mrs. De Wint, No. 5 Bolton Street, Piccadilly, June 12th. Dearest Bessie, you will see that we have left that terrible, hateful, fatal house. How I wish we had escaped from it sooner. Oh, my dear Bessie, I shall never be the same woman again if I live to be 100. Let me try to be coherent, and to tell you connectedly what has happened. And first, as to the housemaid, she has been removed to a lunatic asylum, where she remains as much in the same state. She has had several lucid intervals, and during them has been closely, pressingly questioned as to what it was that she saw. But she has maintained an absolute, hopeless silence, and only shudders, moans, and hides her face in her hands when the subject is broached. 3 days ago I went to see her, and on my return was sitting resting in the drawing-room before going to dress for dinner, talking to Adela about my visit, when Ralph Gordon walked in. He has always been walking in the last 10 days, and Adela has always flushed up and looked very happy, poor little cat, whenever he made his appearance. He was very handsome, dear fellow, just coming from the park, seemed in tremendous spirits, and was as sceptical as even you could be, as to the ghostly origin of Sarah's seizures. "Let me come here tonight and sleep in that room. Do, Miss Montresor," he said, looking very eager and excited. "With the gas lit and poker, I'll engage to exorcise every demon that shows its ugly nose, even if I should find 7 white ghostesses sifting on 7 white postesses." "You don't mean really?" I asked incredulously. "Don't I? That's all," he answered empathetically. "I should like nothing better." "Well, is it a bargain?" Adela turned quite pale. "Oh, don't," she said hurriedly. "Please don't. Why should you run such a risk? How do you know that you might not be sent mad too?" He laughed very heartily and coloured a little with pleasure at seeing the interest she took in his safety. "Never fear," he said. "It would take more than a whole squadron of departed ones, with the old gentleman at their head, to send me crazy." He was so eager, so persistent, so thoroughly in earnest, that I yielded at last, though with a certain strong reluctance to his entreaties. Adela's blue eyes filled with tears, and she walked away hastily to the conservatory, and stood picking bits of heliotrope to hide them. Nevertheless, Ralph got his own way. It was so difficult to refuse him anything. We gave up all our engagements for the evening, and he did the same with his. At about 10 o'clock he arrived, accompanied by a friend and brother officer, Captain Burton, who was anxious to see the result of the experiment. "Let me go up at once," he said, looking very happy and animated. "I don't know when I have felt in such good tune. A new sensation is a luxury not to be had every day of one's life. Turn the gas up as high as it will go, provide a good stout poker, and leave the issue to Providence and me." We did this as he bid. "It's all ready now," Henry said, coming downstairs after having obeyed his orders. "The room is nearly as light as day. Well, good luck to you, old fellow." "Goodbye, Miss Bruce," Ralph said, going over to Adela and taking her hand with a look, half laughing, half sentimental. "Fare thee well, and if for ever, then for ever, fare thee well. That is my last dying speech and confession. Now mind," he went on, standing by the table and addressing us all, "if I ring once, don't come. I may be flurried and lay hold of the bell without thinking. If I ring twice, come." Then he went jumping up the stairs 3 steps at a time and humming a tune. As for us, we sat in different attitudes of expectation and listening about the drawing-room. At first we tried to talk a little, but it would not do. Our whole souls seemed to have passed into our ears, the clock's ticking sounding as loud as a great church bell close to one's ear. Addie lay on the sofa with her dear little white face hidden in the cushions. So we sat for exactly an hour, but it seemed like 2 years. And just as the clock began to strike 11, a sharp ting, ting, ting rang clear and shrill through the house. "Let us go," said Addie, starting up and running to the door. "Let us go," I cried too, following her. But Captain Burton stood in the way, intercepted our progress. "No," he said decisively. "You must not go. Remember, Gordon told us distinctly, if he rang once, not to come. I know the sort of fellow he is, and that nothing would annoy him more than having his directions disregarded." "Oh, nonsense!" Addie cried passionately. "He would never have rung if he had not seen something dreadful. Do let us go!" She ended clasping her hands. But she was overruled, and we all went back to our seats. 10 minutes more of suspense, next door to unendurable. I felt a lump in my throat, a gasping for breath. 10 minutes on the clock, but 1,000 centuries on our hearts. Then again, loud, sudden, violent, the bell rang. We made a simultaneous rush to the door. I don't think we were 1 second flying upstairs. Addie was first. Almost simultaneously, she and I burst into the room. There he was, standing in the middle of the floor, rigid, petrified, with that same look that is burnt into my heart in letters of fire, of awful, unspeakable, stony fear on his brave young face. For 1 instant he stood thus, then stretching out his arms stiffly before him, he groaned in a terrible, husky voice, "Oh, my God, I have seen it!" and fell down dead. Yes, dead. Not in a swoon or in a fit, but dead. Vainly we tried to bring back the life to that strong young heart. It will never come back again till that day when the earth and the sea give up the dead that are therein. I cannot see the page for the tears that are blinding me. He was such a dear fellow. I can't write any more today. Your broken-hearted Cecilia. This is a true story.
Our second episode tonight, The Furnished Room by O. Henry, takes place in the Lower West Side of New York City. A young man searching for his lover rents a furnished room. Weary from months of searching, he sits down to rest one night. Or does he?
O. Henry, The Furnished Room. Restless, shifting, fugacious as time itself in a certain vast bulk of the population of the red brick district of the Lower West Side. Homeless. They have 100 homes. They flit from furnished room to furnished room, transients forever. Transients in abode, transients in heart and mind. They sing Home Sweet Home in ragtime. They carry their lares et penates in a bandbox. Their vine is entwined about a picture hat. A rubber plant is their fig tree. Hence the houses of this district, having had 1,000 dwellers, should have 1,000 tales to tell, mostly dull ones, no doubt. But it would be strange if there could not be found a ghost or two in the wake of all these vagrant guests. One evening, after dark, a young man prowled among these crumbling red mansions, ringing their bells. At the 12th, he rested his lean hand baggage upon the step and wiped the dust from his hatband and forehead. The bell sounded faint and far away in some remote hollow depths. To the door of this, the 12th house, whose bell he had rung, came a housekeeper who had made him think of an unwholesome, surfeited worm that had eaten its nuts to a hollow shell and now sought to fill the vacancy with edible lodgers. He asked if there was a room to let. "Come in," said the housekeeper. Her voice came from her throat. Her throat seemed lined with fur. "I have the 3rd floor back, vacant since a week back. Should you wish to look at it?" The young man followed her up the stairs. A faint light from no particular source mitigated the shadows of the halls. They trod noiselessly upon a stair carpet that its own loom would have forsworn. It seemed to have become vegetable, to have degenerated in that rank, sunless air to lush lichen or spreading moss that grew in patches to the staircase and was viscid under the foot like organic matter. At each turn of the stairs were vacant niches in the wall. Perhaps plants had once been set within them. If so, they had died in that foul and tainted air. It may be that statues of the saints had stood there, but it was not difficult to conceive that imps and devils had dragged them forth into the darkness and down to the unholy depths of some furnished pit below. "This is the room," said the housekeeper, from her furry throat. "It's a nice room. It ain't often vacant. I had some most elegant people in it last summer. No trouble at all, and paid in advance to the minute. The water's at the end of the hall. Sprowls and Mooney kept it 3 months. They done a vaudeville sketch. Miss Beretta Sprowls, you may have heard of her. Oh, that was just the stage names. Right there, over the dresser, is where the marriage certificate hung, framed. The gas is here, and you see there is plenty of closet room. It's a room everybody likes. It never stays idle long." "Do you have many theatrical people rooming here?" asked the young man. "They comes and goes. A good proportion of my lodgers is connected with the theaters. Yes, sir, this is the theatrical district. Actor people never stay long anywhere. I get my share. Yes, they comes and they goes." He engaged the room, paying for a week in advance. He was tired, he said, and would take possession at once. He counted out the money. The room had been made ready, she said, even the towels and water. As the housekeeper moved away, he put, for the 1000th time, the question that he carried at the end of his tongue. "A young girl, Miss Vashner, Miss Eloise Vashner. Do you remember such a one among your lodgers? She would be singing on the stage, most likely. A fair girl, of medium height and slender, with reddish gold hair and a dark mole near her left eyebrow." "No, I don't remember the name. Them stage people has names they change as often as their rooms. No, I don't call that one to mind." No. Always no. 5 months of ceaseless interrogation and the inevitable negative. So much time spent by day in questioning managers, agents, schools, and choruses. By night, among the audiences of theaters, from all-star casts down to music halls so low that he dreaded to find what he most hoped for. He who had loved her best had tried to find her. He was sure that since her disappearance from home, this great water-girt city held her somewhere, but it was like a monstrous quicksand, shifting its particles constantly, with no foundation, its upper granules of today buried tomorrow in ooze and slime. The furnished room received its latest guest with a first glow of pseudo-hospitality, a hectic, haggard, perfunctory welcome like the specious smile of a demirep. The sophistical comfort came in reflected gleams from the decayed furniture, the ragged brocade upholstery of a couch and 2 chairs, a foot-wide cheap pier glass between the 2 windows, from 1 or 2 gilt picture frames, and a brass bedstead in a corner. The guest reclined, inert, upon a chair, while the room, confused in speech as though it were an apartment in Babel, tried to discourse him of its diverse tenantry. A polychromatic rug, like some brilliant flowered, rectangular, tropical islet, lay surrounded by a billowy sea of soiled matting. Upon the gay-papered wall were those pictures that pursue the homeless, one from house to house, the Huguenot lovers, the first quarrel, the wedding breakfast, Psyche at the fountain. The mantel's chastely severe outline was ingloriously veiled behind some pert drapery drawn rakishly askew like the sashes of the Amazonian ballet. Upon it was some desolate flotsam, cast aside by the rooms marooned when a lucky sail had borne them to a fresh port, a trifling vase or 2, pictures of actresses, a medicine bottle, some stray cards out of a deck. One by one, as the characters of a cryptograph became explicit, the little signs left by the furnished room's procession of guests developed a significance. The threadbare space in the rug in front of the dresser told that lovely woman had marched in the throng. The tiny fingerprints on the wall spoke of little prisoners trying to feel their way to sun and air. A splattered stain, raying like the shadow of a bursting bomb, witnessed where a hurled glass or bottle had splintered with its contents against the wall. Across the pier glass had been scrawled with a diamond in staggering letters the name Marie. It seemed that the succession of dwellers in the furnished room had turned in fury, perhaps tempted beyond forbearance by its garish coldness, and wreaked upon it in their passions. The furniture was chipped and bruised. The couch, distorted by bursting springs, seemed a horrible monster that had been slain during the stress of some grotesque convulsion. Some more potent upheaval had cloven a great slice from the marble mantel. Each plank in the floor owned its particular cant and shriek, as from a separate and individual agony. It seemed incredible that all this malice and injury had been wrought upon the room by those who had called it, for a time, their home. And yet it may have been the cheated home instinct surviving blindly, the resentful rage at false household gods that had kindled their warmth. A hut that is our own we can sweep and adorn and cherish. The young tenant in the chair allowed these thoughts to file, soft-shod, through his mind, while there drifted into the room furnished sounds and furnished scents. He heard in one room a tittering and incontinent slack laughter, in others the monologue of a scold, the rattling of dice, a lullaby, and one crying dully. Above him a banjo tinkled with spirit. Doors banged somewhere. The elevated trains roared intermittently. A cat yowled miserably upon a back fence, and he breathed the breath of the house, a dank savor rather than a smell, a cold, musty effluvium as from underground vaults mingled with the reeking exhalations of linoleum and mildewed and rotten woodwork. Then suddenly, as he rested there, the room was filled with the strong, sweet odor of mignonette. It came as upon a single buffet of wind, with such sureness and fragrance and emphasis that it almost seemed a living visitant. And the man cried aloud, "What, dear? What, dear?" as if he had been called, and sprang up and faced about. The rich odor clung to him and wrapped him around. He reached out his arms for it, all his senses for the time confused and commingled. How could one be peremptorily called by an odor? Surely it must have been a sound. But was it not the sound that had touched, that had caressed him? "She has been in this room!" he cried, and he sprang to wrest from it a token, for he knew he would recognize the smallest thing that had belonged to her, or that she had touched. This enveloping scent of mignonette, the odor that she had loved and made her own. Whence it came? The room had been but carelessly set in order. Scattered upon the flimsy dresser scarf were half a dozen hairpins, those discreet, indistinguishable friends of womankind, feminine of gender, infinite of mood, and uncommunicative of tense. These he ignored, conscious of their triumphant lack of identity. Ransacking the drawers of the dresser, he came upon a discarded, tiny, ragged handkerchief. He pressed it to his face. It was racy and insolent with heliotrope. He hurled it to the floor. In another drawer, he found odd buttons, a theater program, a pawnbroker's card, 2 lost marshmallows, a book on the divination of dreams. But the black satin hairbow also is femininity's demure, impersonal, common ornament, and tells no tales. And then he traversed the room like a hound on the scent, skimming the walls, considering the corners of the bulging matting on his hands and knees, rummaging mantel and tables, the curtains and hangings, the drunken cabinet in the corner, for a visible sign, unable to perceive that she was there beside, around, against, within, above him, clinging to him, wooing him, calling him so poignantly through the finer senses that even his grosser ones became cognizant of the call. Once again he answered loudly, "Yes, dear," and turned, wild-eyed, to gaze on vacancy, for he could not yet discern form and color and love and outstretched arms in the odor of mignonette. O God, whence that odor? And since when have odors had a voice to call? Thus he groped. He burrowed in crevices and corners, and found corks and cigarettes. These he passed in passive contempt, but once he found in a fold of the matting a half-smoked cigar, and this he ground beneath his heel with a green and trenchant oath. He sifted the room from end to end. He found dreary and ignoble small records of many a peripatetic tenant, but of her whom he sought, and who may have lodged there, and whose spirit seemed to hover there, he found no trace. And then he thought of the housekeeper. He ran from the haunted room downstairs and to a door that showed a crack of light. She came out to his knock. He smothered his excitement as best he could. "Will you tell me, madam?" he besought her. "Who occupied the room I have before I came?"
"Yes, sir. I can tell you again. 'Twas Sprowls and Mooney, as I said. Miss Beretta Sprowls it was in the theatres, but Mrs. Mooney she was. My house is well known for respectability. The marriage certificate hung framed on a nail of—"
"What kind of lady was Miss Sprowls? In looks, I mean."
"Why, black-haired, sir, short and stout, with a comical face. They left a week ago Tuesday."
"And before they occupied it?"
"Why, there was a single gentleman connected with the draying business. He left owing me a week. Before him was Mrs. Crowder and her 2 children that stayed 4 months. And back of them was old Mr. Doyle, whose sons paid for him. He kept the room 6 months. That goes back a year, sir, and further I do not remember."
He thanked her and crept back to his room. The room was dead. The essence that had vivified it was gone. The perfume of mignonette had departed. In its place was the old, stale odor of moldy house furniture, of atmosphere and storage. The ebbing of his hope drained his faith. He sat staring at the yellow, singing gaslight. Soon he walked to the bed and began to tear the sheets into strips. With the blade of his knife he drove them tightly into every crevice around windows and door. When all was snug and taut, he turned out the light, turned the gas full on again, and laid himself gratefully upon the bed. It was Mrs. McCool's night to go with the can for beer, so she fetched it and sat with Mrs. Purdy in one of those subterranean retreats where housekeepers foregather and worm dieth seldom.
"I rented out my 3rd floor back this evening," said Mrs. Purdy across a fine circle of foam. "A young man took it. He went up to bed 2 hours ago." "Now did ye, Mrs. Purdy, ma'am?"
said Mrs. McCool with intense admiration.
"You do be a wonder for renting rooms of that kind. And did you tell him then?" she concluded in a husky whisper laden with mystery.
"Rooms," said Mrs. Purdy in her furriest tones, "are furnished to rent. I did not tell him, Mrs. McCool."
"'Tis right you are, ma'am. 'Tis by renting rooms we keep alive. You have the rale sense for business, ma'am. There be many people will reject the renting of a room that be told a suicide han been after dying in the bed of it." "As you say, we have our living to be making," remarked Mrs. Purdy. "Yes, ma'am, 'tis true. 'Tis just 1 week ago this day I helped you lay out that 3rd floor back. A pretty slip of a colleen she was to be killing herself with the gas. A sweet little face she had, Mrs. Purdy, ma'am."
"She'd have been called handsome, as you say," said Mrs. Purdy, assenting but critical.
"But for that mole she had a-growing by her left eyebrow. Do fill up your glass again, Mrs. McCool."
Thank you for joining us for tonight's performances of The Truth, the Whole Truth, Nothing But the Truth by Rhoda Broughton. Read by Alyssa Maas and Wendy Eden. And The Furnished Room by O. Henry. Read by Matthew Posner. Join us again tomorrow at the same time for 2 more scary stories to be told in the dark.